was a strange period, actually. I mean, the Lamb kind of started for me. I can remember driving into Headley, Grange. I had Andy, my first wife, with me, and I had Jolie with me. And there was this kind of... It was a bit like going into a Dickens novel, you know. It was like this... windows broken and rats everywhere. There were rats everywhere. Bad Company had used it, and Zeppelin had used it, and they'd recorded the When the Levee Breaks album there. But no one had cleaned up. It was really odd. I mean, this poor woman that owned the house, I don't think she knew what she was letting herself in for. But literally there were rats everywhere. So you'd walk in and you'd be walking down the corridor and 2 or 3 rats would walk past you. They wouldn't scurry away. They just walk past you and stop and look at you. Say, well, yeah, got a problem? You know. And then in the back garden, there was these vines, you know, up the back wall, and you'd see this constant scurry of activity. And I was bringing a daughter into this, you know, where we were going to stay the night. I mean, at night when you went to bed, you could hear the scurrying around it. I mean, the place never slept. So, first of all, we had to clear up, but we never got rid of the rats. I mean, they were always there. And it was kind of weird time.
I remember talking to Robert Plant about this. They worked in the same place. Zepp had worked at Headley Grange. And he said, you know, I'm convinced that place was haunted. I said, me too. I heard the sounds at night. I couldn't get off to sleep. That place was weird.
So we took over the living room to write, and there was another room with a piano, which I guess during the first few weeks of this, there must have been discussions, which I was there for. But I don't remember much about who wrote the lyrics. You know, it was one story, okay. One story, one lyric writer, which I guess in theory is the way to go. But so what I remember mostly about the Lamb was the 4 of us in the big room, jamming and writing and recording on my Nakamichi, everything. And in the other room, Peter writing lyrics to the things that were already there. Which means that, I mean, obviously we did play some stuff all together, but it was like him and us, it seemed. You know, my shutter went off at those moments. That's what I remember.
Concept and lyric were all Peter's, and I'm not... I mean, I have to be honest, and I say that I think the actual story is the weakest thing about the album. I mean, I don't think the story is really very gripping. Some of the individual lyrics are wonderful, I think, but the totality just doesn't move me. It doesn't do anything for me, really. It reads a bit like a sort of Kurt Vonnegut novel or something, you know, without perhaps quite as good imagery. And I just that's always stays with me, really. It doesn't satisfy me in the way that some of the other albums do. I mean, the Supper's Ready concept was a much simpler thing, you know, good and evil, you know, but that worked great, I think. But this one, not so well.
The story is, in a way, it's like a Pilgrim's Progress, but on the streets of New York. So it's a spiritual journey into the soul, and but there's quite a tough world that is feeding the imagery and the starting point. So one of the influences on me was a film called El Topo by Alejandro Jodorowsky, who I invited later to work on a screenplay for The Lamb with me. And this was a rough, visceral, cowboy, spiritual film, and it was unique at the time. Had a really strong cult following, and that was the blend that I was trying to put together in a way that would allow more people to try and travel with me.
I think maybe we decided to do a double album to give ourselves a bit more space, as simple as that. I think, you know, you could do them, and we felt a single album rather constrained you. And I think we had this idea, if I remember, that by making it a much longer time scale to work on music, you know, you could do these little jams, improvisations. It would give us a chance to be a little bit freer with how we were playing, I think.
I think when we started writing, and we seemed to have quite a lot of ideas on The Lamb, we thought it would be, the idea of making it a double album concept would be adventurous and would be quite a nice thing to try and do, you know. We had no idea what the concept was going to be or anything, but we felt that the audience our audience would be able to take it, and so we found it quite an exciting idea of things to do. And then obviously we had to set about and think about what was the concept going to be about. And I think at this point, Peter sort of had an idea, and he seemed quite keen to do all the lyrics, which was something which we'd never done before. The lyrics had been very much split throughout the group prior to this time. And we weren't really in favour of this, I mean, to be honest, I think the rest of us, because it felt that it would give the album a sort of one-dimensional quality. And I think lyrically, I mean, for me, it does have that for that reason. And but anyhow, I think perhaps the relationships in the group was getting a little bit more, wasn't quite as easy as it once had been. Probably because Peter was being thrust out as the star in a way. Media would only concentrate on Peter really, which was strange in a group that was as sort of as democratic as we were in a way, in the way everything came with music and everything was done. So that was a little bit difficult for us, I think. And obviously during the making of, while we were actually writing this album, Peter actually got an offer to do this film script for William Friedkin, and he decided he was going to do it and went off. And that was in the middle of the writing.
I'd written a story, from having done these introduction stories, which went on the back of the live album. And it was about a woman who began sort of stripping in a tube train and taking off her clothes. Anyway, eventually she strips herself down and all that's left is this sort of tube of light. And it was something that caught William Friedkin's fancy, because he was Mr. Hot and Happening in Hollywood at the time, because he'd just done Exorcist. And he wanted to use that power to try and reinvent Hollywood and bring in a whole new team of people. And he invited me in as an ideas person, to brainstorm and come up with different concepts in different areas. He'd actually approached Tangerine Dream to do the music. And there was a guy called Philippe Drouillet, who was from Heavy Metal magazine. There was an animated designer that he wanted to work on some of the visuals. And to me, it was a very exciting opportunity. Not because it was Hollywood so much, but because I love ideas, I love brainstorming with smart people, and that was suddenly going to be given a vehicle and given a chance to come to life. So I really wanted to do it. And I think even though, Phil has always been a sort of jobbing musician and doing other things, there was from I think Tony and to some extent Mike, this feeling, well, I think it was a bit, why should he have all the fun? But it was the sense that, no, we're not happy to make time for you to go off and piss away valuable band time when you should be committed and turning up at 9 o'clock every morning. And that was a sort of hot, contentious issue.
And so he did leave, because we gave him an ultimatum: you choose Friedkin or you stay with the band. So he went. William Friedkin I didn't want to split the band up. I don't even know if this is going to work. This is just an idea. So Peter comes back. But at that point, of course, we all know that this could happen at any time. My first feeling when Peter left was, okay, well, the vocals get in the way anyway. Let's just do it instrumentally. Let's just get rid of all the vocals and just do it instrumental. We all like the instrumental bits anyway. So, of course, that was poo-pooed, quite rightly. And Peter came back and we carried on writing. And then we went to Wales, this farm in Wales, to record it with John Burns and a mobile. And that was great fun.
We had our first child, Jill, who was married to at the time. It was, as it is for anyone really, it's suddenly the most important thing in your life by a long way. And we had a disastrous birth. We were all set for sort of natural birth, putting her on the breast. she had an infection which was given to her from an epidural needle which wasn't clean, so she had a fever, Jill had the fever, cord round her neck, lungs full of gunk, everything was going wrong, and we didn't think she was going to survive. They put her in an incubator, carried her away like a piece of chicken carcass wrapped up in silver paper, and they actually wouldn't let my wife see her because they thought it would be cruel for her to bond with the baby who wasn't going to make it through. Chances were so low. I mean, they wouldn't do that nowadays, but they thought they were being kind. That was then the center of everything, and the band, of course, were recording instead of somewhere reasonably close to London, where we were in St Mary's, Paddington, out in Wales. And I was making these sort of long pilgrimages beforehand, and then I would be based here, and then whenever things looked better, I'd try and zoom back to Wales for the recording. So this was something that the band, I think, would accept now, that they were not very understanding, and I just lost it in lots of ways because I felt, this is so obviously more important than an album or anything else. This is life and death, and it's the center of my family. That's where I need to be. And there was a lot of resentment about that. So I think the seeds for the beginning of the end were sown at that point.
To be honest, we always, looking back, we were so unsupportive. We were like young into the album, intense, this is what we're doing, And Pete, poor old Pete, having to, deal with a terribly traumatic birth, and touch and go and dramas, we gave no help at all, actually, which I think must have been hard.
It was very difficult. My marriage was breaking up. It looked as if, we only had half a singer. The level of commitment to the band seemed shaky at that point. So for me, it cast a pall on proceedings. And although I think it's a very inventive album and has got great moments on it, I still feel there was this sense of claustrophobia that accompanied it for me. The idea that we were still trying to employ the philosophy of everyone going away together and living together cheek by jowl, but there were families, there were children. It really wasn't a healthy kind of environment for everybody.
The scent grows richer. He knows he must be near. He finds a long passageway lit by chandelier.
To try and keep everybody happy, there would be parts of it where, we'd be discussing lyrics and throwing some of the words around for different bits. And so the Lamia, which was so Tony's musical piece, or supernatural anaesthetist, was Steve had brought in. So then, they would discuss some of the lyrical stuff with me because they'd sort of got the writer's ticket. But, I was pretty anal about hanging on to some lyrical flow-through and, being able to put a stamp on it. I really wanted a sort of tougher edge to this record than we'd had previously. And I didn't think there was anyone else in the band that was going to deliver that.
Struck by beauty, gripped in fright. 3 vermilion snakes of female face, the smallest motion filled with grace.
I think the sound on the Lamb is better. It was slightly more like they were recording us live. I said earlier that we always felt like the live sound was good, and on record it was a bit of a struggle to get it back good enough as it was in the room. We recorded in a room, and I think that made it feel. The drums had more of a live feel. And I think that the sound improved a lot. I mean, there's some good sound on this album, I think, because of the idea of not being in the studio, being in a live room, you know, and sort of miking that more like we're sort of playing together on stage. So I think the sound was quite an improvement for us, yeah.
Some of those tracks sound even a bit like Neil Young, you know, the barn recordings of Neil Young with Crazy Horse, you know, that you can. It's just, it has that kind of, not a studio, not soundproof, but very woody quality. So
coming back to it and doing the remixes and everything, what's actually on the tapes is really good, you know. And to be honest, the original mix isn't bad either, I don't think, on this album. There's less change on this than, say, on the previous records, which is quite a bit of changing going on. I mean, you can still do a lot with it, you know, a lot of moments you can really have fun with. And, you know, things like with the 5.1, you can sort of, you know, the different characters, like on Slipper Men, you sort of voices out the back and things, which is quite nice. So it's disconcerting things like that happening. So we tried quite hard to make it a sort of interesting 5.1 mix as well as the new stereo. So it works pretty well.
Rock face moves to press my skin. White liquid turns sour within. Turn fast, turn sour.
It was a dark time, I think, and so it felt as if we were sort of still living that dream of isolating ourselves and being in a sort of supposedly nurturing creative environment, but it wasn't working in on lots of different levels yet. You know, I think still some of our best material of the period when I was there in The Lamb Lies Down, and that's still one of the things looking back that, you know, I feel proud of. So, you know, there is, I think, quite often this irony when you get really shitty things going on in life, and yet the creativity that comes out of it can still be strong, interesting, and move people.
You know, we just had more space on this album because of the double album. I know it sounds very simple to say it, but that meant you could actually breathe a bit, you know, not rush from section to section. And of course we took it live, played America, before the album was out. So we're playing the whole show, a new album that's not out, concept double album. I'm thinking about it, it was madness really, but actually it went down okay.
In terms of songs, I always think of The Lamb Lies Down itself being the sort of last song that Peter and I kind of ever wrote together, because we'd written a lot in the early days together and things. And, you know, it was a pretty good song to end on, really. But the rest of the album, sort of, as I said, it was kind of, I don't know what it is, something about it. I think the lyrics, although they're good lyrics, but it means that no song really kind of stands out on its own. You know, what could have been, say, some really pretty song like The Lamia, for example. I mean, if you start singing that out of context, it makes no sense at all. You know, you sort of talk about snakes and stuff. And so I slightly resent that aspect of it, I suppose. And the one we obviously, there's two songs we perform quite often out of context from that, which one is In the Cage, which sort of almost works, although the Brother John bit in the middle lyrically doesn't make much sense, but I think it's a really strong piece of music, so it all stands up. And then the other one's The Carpet Crawlers, which works because it's got a chorus that kind of could relate to anything. I mean, the verse lyrics are pretty strange if you listen to them, but they're some lovely imagery in there as well. So I think that works well out of context.
It's not a record company album. That, you know, the record company will come and say, "What the fuck is that on there? You've got to get rid of that. There's no singing on that. Get rid of that." You know. So and that was what was wonderful about Stratton Smith, and you know, he would just try to deal with whatever we gave him, and Atlantic did their best like that too, because Ahmet was a big music person, and you know, he probably didn't understand anything about The Lamb Lies Down at all. It's just that he could see that it was something adventurous, and he just kind of crossed his fingers and hoped that we weren't mad, you know.
The carpet crawlers, he dare call us. We gotta get him to get out.
Well, Carpet Crawlers, it's difficult to know really. When we wrote it, we actually had a couple of moments in the story that Peter had some action, which we didn't have any music for. So we sort of were sitting in the room, and Mike and I just sort of started just doodling, you know, and played this very simple chord sequence to develop this idea, just the thing. And so that we said, well, there you go, there's a basis. And then Pete wrote this thing on top of it.
And of the melody of that track, because I worked my arse off on that. It was actually, I was staying mainly with at Jill's parents' place, which was in Kensington, and there was an old out-of-tune piano, but I spent hours and hours honing that melody in, and then the lyric.
It just worked really well. It's one of those things, very simple, you know, and I think that's half its charm. Sometimes with Genesis it's a bit overworked and we sort of put too much into things, and something like this, which is, you know, almost a sort of bog standard sort of chord sequence in a way. Well, the chorus is a little bit different, but it just gave it somewhere to go. And I think I don't know why. You know, what is it? It's got it. I think the sort of the fact the song slowly crescendos, you know, and it kind of just sort of creeps into you like that. It's got a very strong chorus hook as well, I think, which is why I think why audiences like it. I don't know really. It shines out a little bit from the album in terms of its sort of its solidity and confidence, I think, because the other songs I say are all a bit more meandering, and you just think there's one very sort of bright spark in the middle of the album like this, which at the time we wrote it, we had no idea that it was going to be picked out like that. You know, we played the album to people, and we thought that probably the single would, if there was going to be a single, it would be Counting Out Time. And everyone said no, Carpet Crawlers is the one. You know, we released the single, of course, it wasn't a hit or anything, but we've tried again. We tried it a couple of times since then, releasing it. It's still never done anything.
Early morning, man had on ocean winds blow on the land. Movie palaces now undone.
I think the title track, you know, the opening track, I think is great. The piano riff, and Pete sets up the image, describing the New York scenes, you know. Early morning skyline, those sort of lines, you know, I think they really paint a picture of the album.
Rise
I remember it. We were really pushed to get the album finished, and we were at Island Studios. And by this point we had a day shift and a night shift, and I was on the night shift with Peter, I think, and the day shift was Tony and Mike and Steve. And we did a mix of it, me and Pete, and then the other guys came in and thought we were mad and changed everything, and there was a bit of friction there, I remember. But we were just trying to get it finished and try and get it out.
I'm counting out time, got the whole thing down by numbers, all those numbers give me guidance.
Well, I think Counting Out Time is played because it's a pop song, you know, in the way that some of the other ones are. It's that was a song of Pete's, actually, Counting Out Time, entirely, which I think is a good little song. I mean, it works very nicely, you know. I think it's good in context of the album again, because it's simpler compared with a lot of the other things.
I think Counting Out Time was the nearest thing to a single on the album, but it was a trifle risque.
It's all about early sexual experiences, trying to do it by the book.
Possibly not as strong as it could be musically. I think you need a bit more of a hook than just da 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 da, you know.
I love Back in New York City. That was just a weird track. I mean, it was just out there, so heavy for us.
Back in New York City.
I think I wrote it with the band. I can't remember actually, but I think it was sort of and a lot of jamming, a lot of improvising. And I know we were conscious at the time. We were thinking that it's kind of a shame when Pete wanted to move on, because we thought this is sounding really good musically, very strong. And I think at the end it's still a strong piece.
That started off as a riff of Mike's. He just had this idea of playing on. He had a 6-string bass, and he was playing this riff on it. And then we sort of developed that as a song, and then Pete just did this sort of shouting type vocal on it, which was kind of, at the time, was sort of quite surprising, you know, but I think it works pretty well. Again, I think the song is a bit more complicated than it needs to be. I think there's a couple of little extra bits in the middle there that should probably, courtesy of me, in fact, I think, which probably be better off if they weren't there, but they are there, so that's what you've got.
People have covered it. I mean, back in New York City, it's been covered by a couple of different bands recently that I've got. You know, I managed to get hold of these things when I hear about them. But yeah, I mean, just from my point of view as a player, I mean, I was playing. I mean, I went to see the Musical Box play this in its entirety, and I was amazed at just how complicated it was. And this guy was playing it well, but I mean, I must have played it better. You know what I mean? Because I wrote it, and I mean, my drum set was like, you know, like a huge. I mean, it wasn't like a big drum kit. It was just like lots of noises here, lots of things there, and I was whizzing around it. I mean, it was probably the height. I mean, certainly between that and then the next 3 or 4 years with Brand X and Genesis, that was probably the height of my playing, you know. But a lot of inventive stuff, you know, from everybody. I mean, Steve was, you know, like a great sound guy, and, you know, Tony was getting the maximum out of what he had. You know, we were onto the double neck kind of thing with the guitar and bass. And it seemed to be a very, you know, a surge forward, really. Well, I just think that they display a side of Genesis that no one really, well, everyone forgets, apart from the ardent fan, they forget or they've never heard. And I think it's actually the way we start writing now, by doing things like that. That's how I Can't Dance started. That's how No Son of Mine started. That's how all these songs. That's how we used to write. You know, we just would start playing, and our brief on the waiting room, for example, was the mood we want is darkness to light. And I remember I had this. I think it's out there as a bootleg. I don't know how, because I had the only cassette, but I used to cassette everything. I was the keeper of the tapes, you know. I'm still the writer of the minutes of the meetings, you know. But we started making noises. Steve with his darkness and lots of range sticks and eerie noises, and suddenly, you know, Tony would start playing these chords, and I went, and literally it was pouring rain outside. And we kind of, Tony put some chords in, and suddenly it started changing rhythm from dum 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 ding 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 ding, and there was a rainbow, and it stopped raining, and the sun came out. I mean, it's most era. I mean, cosmic thing, you know. I mean, nothing. I just only report the news. I don't make it. I was there, and it happened, and it was the most amazing thing. And it kind of, it was just a little golden 8 or 9 minute moment. And that's what those are the bits that I remember. And I think it would be good if people kind of remembered that side of it. That's the same band, like Silent Sorrow and Empty Boats, which is like, you know, sailing ships, you know, like clouds and fog. The same band that plays Hold On My Heart. The same band that plays the songs that they say we've sold out to. It's the same band, you know, it's the same mentality.
It's the last great invention left to mankind. Screams a drooping lady, offering her dream dolls at less than extortionate prices.
Eno was upstairs taking Tiger Mountain by Strategy, and Peter was a fan of Roxy music. I guess they were. I'd never heard of rock. I've heard of them, but I'd never heard their music. Anyway, he asked Eno to come down and put the vocals through his ARP. So he did, and that Grand Parade of Lifeless Packaging was one of the things he did. And after we'd finished that, some deal was made, and I was sent upstairs to play drums on Eno's record, which was fine by me because I ended up getting to know him very well and playing on Another Green World and Before and After Science and Music for Films, you know. And we've stayed in touch. But I felt like some kind of prostitute, you know. He's come down and played on our record. Now you're going to have to go and pay him back. You know, like what do I have to do? Just play the drums. Oh, good.
I was and am still, you know, a fan of what Brian does and brings to projects, and it just seemed like this was for us an adventurous album, and that I really wanted him to come in and wave his magic wand over a few of the sort of sound areas, which we called enosification.
It's a funny album, this really, because I suppose it's sort of looked back on as something of a classic. I didn't really enjoy sort of writing or making this album to the same extent as I did all the other albums. I mean, there's a lot of my stuff on this album, I have to say, a lot of bits I had. Some bits I had around for a while, and, you know, particularly with the bits that ended up in, obviously, The Lamb and The Cage and, you know, and Lamy and Slipperman and all that sort of stuff. And we did a lot of improvising as well and created these bits. And I think some of the most exciting bits on the album are actually these little interludes that we had. One of my favourite ones is the one we ended up calling a Fly on a Windshield, I think, which was originally was called Pharaohs. And we just sort of sat down and was playing sort of fifths and just making it sort of like the Egyptian army sort of coming across the landscape was the idea, you know. And we had a sort of quiet one and a loud one, and we just sort of butt-joined them. But then with the lyric, the idea of this sort of fly hitting a windshield, and of course it comes in with such a big bang, which is probably the single best moment in Genesis, I think. That's just that moment when it comes in, that first chord. After that, it's just downhill, but it's just a wonderful moment, I think.
And I'm hovering like a fly, waiting for the windshield on the freeway.
I was trying very, very hard to get my guitar through the mix a lot of the time, and trying very hard and very, very dense keyboard textures, and I'm always trying to do something to highlight and try and do something sympathetic in the background. Although you've got guitar moments like Fly on a Windshield, where you've got the guitar doing something where it sometimes comes to the fore and, you know, rises and falls, and so I think that is a lovely piece of music. So as a guitarist, I love that.
I wandered lonely as a cloud till I came upon this dirty street.
I've always loved visual things, you know, and obviously since then, and it's the chance of having interesting looking visuals or get a reaction from people, you know, much in the same way that the Fox's head and the dress had got a strong reaction. The Slipperman, you know, was a really ugly looking thing, and you know, I would crawl out of his phallus, you know, which would unroll on the stage, and it was a great moment.
I was starting to sort of just feel like the music was being overshadowed by the visuals, which were getting a little bit out of hand. I mean, the idea of having these screens behind us was fantastic, but I mean, they never worked. I think we had maybe 4 shows in 100. When everything actually changed at the right moment. You know, we sort of 2 eyes. We had an eye and a New York street scene, you know, because the slide changer didn't work. And we, you know, all that stuff was frustrating, but it was nothing we could do about it. But there was 2 things. One was the Lamia, where this thing came down, and Peter was in the middle of it, and sometimes the microphone cord would get caught up with the top or the bottom of it, and so either it didn't move or he had to move with it. It was all very Spinal Tap, you know. But, I mean, it was cutting edge, but Spinal Tap. And the worst was the Slipperman, where he you know, came through this inflatable dick, you know, and dressed in this horrible outfit, which sometimes got a little bit stuck on the way out, you know, and other times when he did make it out, the microphone could barely get near his throat, and then he was out of breath. I mean, there's a lot of words in that song, and you know, he was running around. I mean, he kind of hadn't really thought it through, I don't think.
Phil's absolutely correct that it was bloody hard to sing inside there. We didn't have those little tiny mics, so inside this mask I was trying to hold the microphone and tripping up over things, and you know, at different points I'd crawl under Tony's organ, appear at different places, but it was just trying to explore things and push it a lot, and have fun, you know, because it was fun. But again, it was a little like with the lyric. I knew that if everything went to the vote, it would die a horrible death. So again, the way it was performed, I mean, there was, you know, I would, well, on the visual stuff and the slides, I worked a lot with this Jeffrey Shaw and Theo Botschreiber, and then, you know, we'd have sessions, and then I would sort of present them to the band, and Jeffrey was a very good people person. That side of things, there weren't any real problems or battles once people felt good that there was something interesting and of quality coming. But as always, the what I did in terms of masks, costumes and all that stuff, I just had to get on with it and not offer it up to the vote.
It's what Spinal Tap was written for. It's funny, and it was adventurous, and it was edgy, and it was like nobody else, and we should be thankful that we were all in the same band experiencing it. But I didn't think it was very musical, that's all.
Well, I think it works pretty well. Obviously, it's the idea was it's showing sort of images from the story and everything, and it has that kind of it has a sort of a graphic novel sort of quality about it, which I quite like, because I'm a bit of a graphic novel fan, and so I quite like the sort of dark thing about it. I think it was, it was a question of how we used it, whether we used it sort of bigger and over the whole album, or whether we just used that sort of band of stuff. I think it works pretty well. I mean, it's in a lot of character, and also the writing, that sort of Greek lettering we used, which we've obviously come back to a few times later in our career, I think looks very strong on it, really. I think it was good because it gave whereas all the previous albums have all been a bit more romantic, this was a lot less romantic, this album, and having a stark black and white cover like that, I think it made it, you're aware that this wasn't going to be quite as sort of cuddly, perhaps, as some of the previous stuff.
I really liked Storm. It was a wonderful character, very dry, cynical, sardonic, and very talented. And he was just a lot of fun to interact with. He was always rude to everybody, and but when you're riffing ideas, it's a lot of fun. And he also has this bag of the unused hypnosis ideas that he tries to palm off on everyone as new and fresh, but here there was a story and some strong ideas for pictures. I had a sort of Puerto Rican figure in my head who, perhaps West Side Story was maybe another influence as well as El Topo. But the faces that they were able to find in the UK didn't seem anything like what I had in my head. And I remember a big search to try and find someone acceptable as Rael, because I thought the face has to be right. And I think we got pretty close, but it was sort of like 8.5 out of 10.
Hypnosis for years have been trying to get us to use a photographic cover. They always wanted everything to be edgy realism, and the band always wanted something much more, to their mind, that what Hypnosis considered to be airy-fairy. Oh yes, you want all this romantic stuff. Why can't you have something which is contemporary, photographic, literal, perspectives-driven, just like all their other covers? And the cover, I don't think it's the greatest cover ever. I think that Hypnosis did do great covers, occasionally for Led Zeppelin, who I think were perhaps more open to some of their ideas. Like I remember them saying, what about if we have a family sitting around and they're staring at something in the middle of the table and no one really knows what it is? And everyone says, no, don't like that. But everyone was sure that they didn't want their photograph on the front. No one wanted their own face to be on the front of the album. Probably not until Phil did Face Value, but that's another story.
Yeah, I feel it's a little bit as confused as the story. It's a distinct package. I don't think I've ever read the story inside it, actually. It's been one of those things where it's something I should have done, and then it became too late, and there was something else to do, so I never... But again, it's difficult. When someone plonks an album in front of you to sign, what you're signing, very quickly someone goes, okay, picture. The filing cabinet in your head goes back to all the things that... So every album cover has, straight away, even though you're signing your name on something that's 30 years old plus, it has those sort of emotional attachments. Some good, some not so good, but at least evoke something.
I guess maybe because it was in part a visualization of a story, that I may have moved beyond the democratic process, and that didn't go down well.
Fragrant balanced, a flavor strange, a magnificent chamber.
Pete said he was going to leave, and he did. And I remember talking to him on a plane one day. I said, "Are you seriously going to leave at the end of this?" I mean, he said, "Yeah, afraid so. Yeah, I made up my mind." And he's putting me on. It's all part of the act. It's all part of the show. It's like the makeup. It's going to come off. But no, it was not an act. It was real.
As I said many times, when Peter and I started off in the group as sort of, kind of very best friends, I suppose, really. And obviously by then it was getting a little more difficult, I think, particularly within the group. So yes, it was a sort of sad time in that way. And you sort of felt that, particularly once when we did the tour, we did about 100 shows of The Lamb, which wasn't a fantastic show, to be honest, I don't think. Although we tried very hard and had lots of good effects. It was trying to do the whole album, to an audiences who really wanted to hear a lot of the old hits, made it a little more difficult.
But it was a bit strange to be carrying on doing gigs knowing the singer was leaving. I must admit, it was a bit strange. Must have been strange, And then I think the last gig was cancelled, so the gig we were actually at became our last show. So that was a bit of an anticlimax. There was no kind of build-up because the next show had been cancelled because no one bought tickets. Toulouse, we all disagree on where the last show is. It's incredible. I'm convinced that Toulouse was cancelled and we ended it with the five of us in Besançon. Everybody else tells me we ended in Saint Etienne, but you'd think someone would know, wouldn't you? Apparently I'm wrong, but I'm pretty convinced I'm right. Anyway, the last show was cancelled, so that was the end of that.
I think I started to have some frustration of sort of not being part of the keyboard side of things, I have very strong ideas on how things should sound and how you mix things together, and so I think there may have been some frustrations in that department.
I think something happened when he left for a bit, and you're in your mind you're thinking, wait a minute, this guy's maybe he's going to pull somewhere else, different directions. He wants to think outside the band. And so when he finally did break the news, it was not such a huge shock. We had a kind of pre-warning, I just managed to persuade Tony Smith to leave his business and become a manager. Poor guy like that, suddenly, the singer leaves, and I'm sure he thought, oh God, what have I done? But it's funny. In a sense, talking about it now, you said it seems a long period. It's not a long period, you're right, but I'm talking about it now. I think a lot of tours, a lot of work, a lot of gigs, a lot of music, in a sort of 5-year period, actually. I remember seeing once the list of gigs we did 1 year. It was like 190 or no, 200 in 1 year. No, 210 in 1 year, that's a lot of gigs. But it became a bit of a landmark album and an end of an era too, I think.
I mean, one of the several reasons why I left was because that I didn't feel able to control, or that I was in charge of my life, that, I could just look on the calendar and see exactly where I was going to be 18 months from today, and I never liked that feeling.
I have to say that there's been sort of little rumours on and off throughout the years that because of my apparent, unhappiness at Pete's visuals, that I was either an instigator of him leaving, pleased that he left so I could sing, None of that is true, I love Peter to this day as if we've always been close. I played on his album, I played for him as his drummer for free because he couldn't afford a band at one point. We did gigs when he was routining the third album. I love the guy, we went to his wedding and you came to mine. We all get on great, but I've always felt very, very close to Pete. And I was very sad when he left, but we had to get on with it. And I didn't want to be the singer at all because I was the drummer. And by that point, I was a very good drummer. So why would I want to sing? We couldn't find anybody else. So if we couldn't find anybody else, that was the end of it. Or have someone that didn't really make the grade, So bit by bit, I ended up doing the singing. And but people always take the short story. They take the shortest route and they think, Phil's the singer. He's had to go at Pete. He wanted him out.
It's bullshit. Phil yeah, some people think, that Phil was sort of chomping at the bit, waiting to get rid of me, and it wasn't like that at all. I think he loved being a drummer, and although I think was beginning to write songs and enjoy being a singer, for quite some time the band didn't consider him as the singer, and I don't think he really considered himself as the singer for Genesis. So that evolved slowly. It was clear to me that he could have a big career on his own, and I remember, saying that to him and to the rest of the band at the time, and because, as I said, we would often be there hammering out our own things, which were sounding quite different from what the band was doing. It wasn't. I never had the feeling that the band wanted to get rid of me at any time, and I think because we started the tour for the Lamb and that got great reactions, people were hoping that things would all heal, and then we got to the Midwest of America, and it just got too much for me, and I just knew that I was drowning and had to head up for air.
I think it's looked upon now like in the same way that James Dean, only made 3 films, I think, 4 films, but I mean, everyone thinks he's a wonderful actor, and I think everyone looks back at The Lamb with a lot of reverence, but they didn't like it at the time. I think it was, but I'm glad that they got round to it now, but it didn't take the world by storm when it came out, that's for sure.
Musically, there was a confidence and an assurance about what we were doing as writers and players, more than on any other record up to that point. So, there were all these different sort of out of balance elements that ended up making what I think is a good record. There's 1 or 2 weak points where it sort of fizzled out in places, but some of our strongest work.
Yeah, I mean the good bits are good. It was a long album to make. I think a double album is hard to do, especially if things aren't going quite right, like Pete leaving for a bit. And on reflection, I guess it had to be that way. Pete to write all the lyrics. You couldn't mix it up, but it made it. His work was very, very hard, and I think I took him away from us really, and sort of he just got into a space and just worked on lyrics, and there's some great lyrics, but it's still quite. It slightly made us two camps, so to speak. But a good way to end, I think,
Well, I can listen to it without rancor, and I don't remember the pain. I just can enjoy it as a piece of music now and say, yeah, I think it was a clever album. Lots of great keyboard work, not so many opportunities for the guitar to shine, but where it does, I think it's interesting. I tend to think that it parallels, yes, doing Topographic Oceans at that point, a double concept album, and us doing a double album, and I know that very often the guys have felt that maybe it would have made a great single album if the best stuff had been kept. But what would you have kept? What would you have thrown away? Kept my bit, of course. To hell with all the rest.
No, I think it's great that we went out on a good piece of work. And there was never really bad feeling with the individuals. I mean, that we had, like any sort of divorce, there was difficulties, but most of what they wanted, I was prepared to give them, including extra touring time and my tape archive, most of the equipment and stuff. And so it was, at that point, I think they were worried whether they'd be able to continue without me, and clearly they were much more successful without me, so there was actually no real issue. But I think everyone had doubts and were very frustrated because we worked a long time to get some success. We were about to get some financial rewards, which, you know, we hadn't fully paid off. So, you know, when this bastard goes and sabotages the whole thing just as it gets successful, that wasn't, you know, a popular thing to do from a career point of view.
I think it's quite a difficult album. It's very dark and quite dense. But I think, therefore, people sort of, you know, I think people, if you try it and I mean, it still works really well, I think, you know, and I think it's rewarding, and perhaps it takes a little bit more to get into it in the first place, and maybe for that reason, people, you know, once they've got there, hold it up like that. But I think, in honesty, you know, that's the thing about Genesis. Is a strange thing. We don't have any one album that everyone's going to say this is the one. You know, Pink Floyd have got Dark Side of the Moon, whatever. With us, you'll get people saying any album. I've had every album said this is the one, you know, part possibly from Genesis Revelation. You know, I think it's just how you hear things. Sometimes it's at what point in your life you hear a thing, and you know, you're a teenager or something, it hits you harder when you're sort of 15 than it does perhaps when you're sort of 25, you know, and so it stays with you for that reason.